All right, you guys, I am so excited to be here with my good friend, Kathy Moffat. She has agreed to come on and have a very fun conversation with you guys that I think you guys are really going to love. But Kathy, I want everybody to kind of know a little bit more about you. What got you into coaching? What's your specialty? And we can kind of go from there.
All right. Okay, what got me into coaching? Well, actually, I was looking for a relief and solution for a sister who was going through a divorce.
Oh, okay.
I landed and found some podcasts. And then once I started listening to podcasts, I could not get enough of it. So that's kind of what started to taste my appetite for it. At the time, I was in school to be a marriage and family therapist. My
Oh,
goal
okay.
was to work with parents with teenagers with mental illness.
Okay.
But as I found coaching, I thought, ooh, I might take a break from this and do coaching certification and then work with parents. But it has taken a whole new spin for me because, as you know, we get into coaching and then we do the work all on ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, it changed my life.
That's
So that's what
awesome.
got me into coaching.
So who do you coach now? What's your specialty?
Right now, I coach couples. About half of my practice is couples and half is males and females. Because, like I said, I wanted to coach parents, but as I started doing the work, I started finding out that working on my relationship and helping other people with relationship is what I changed me the most.
Yeah.
So anyway, I've been in the coaching world for about 5 years, but
Okay.
spent the last 2 years deep diving and studying relationships and taking trainings like on attachment theory and intimacy and the four horsemen. Um, anyway, that's what I love talking
I
about.
love it. And you're so good at it. And you're so good at making those connections and those relationships. So, and just so everybody knows, I actually have not known Kathy for very long. We have mutual friends and mutual connections, but she reached out to me, I don't know, it was like the end of last year, I believe, and invited me to come to her retreat in Arizona. It was perfect for me because I live in Arizona, so I didn't have to do very much. But it's been since then. Like we had some amazing conversations at her retreat and some of the things we'll talk probably a little bit about today, but it's just been a springboard. And I appreciate just all the knowledge and information that you're willing to share with just everybody. So you're just amazing at it. But
Well, yes, Chantel, this is new, but I have to say that I had been referred to talk to you several times.
oh,
And even you've had Mark on the podcast, and
yeah.
he several times had said to me, Kathy, you need to know Chantel. You need to know Chantel. And so I did. I just found you on Instagram and reached out and made the connection.
Yes,
So
I appreciate that. Well, I'm like I said, I'm so excited to have this conversation. We actually have a Marco Polo with a couple of other peers on there, and one of our fellow friends brought up this conversation around this concept. I think she brought it up. It was near and far enemies, exactly what she said, wasn't it? She said near and far
she
enemy
had read I think she was reading a book about counterfeit emotions.
counterfeit. That's what it was.
Counterfeit
Okay.
emotions,
Okay.
emotions that look like what we're trying to achieve, but maybe miss the mark. And
Yes.
it's very similar to the near and far enemies concept.
Yes. And as soon as we started talking about it, we had a couple Marco Polos back and forth, and then Kathy came on and shared some amazing insights about it. It was like, okay, I mean, I wanted to go and read it for myself, but I'm like, okay, you obviously have so much more information and knowledge about this and a passion for it. And we talk so much on this podcast about emotion work and just being able to understand our emotions and their purpose that I just think this is such a great concept just to give us a different perspective because I think so often, and let me just kind of share why I think this is so powerful, is this fellow coach was mentioning, okay, so what do we think the counterfeit emotion is to peace? And I sat there for I mean, it was a split second for me. It was like, I know, because I told myself for so many years that I was fine, that I was okay, that I was doing all of the things, right? And I think that is a counterfeit to actually some of the things we're going to talk about. But when I learned that, I was like, so many people are telling themselves that they're fine. And I think that's not to use a term that we all hear so often right now, but it's kind of us gaslighting ourselves so that we don't take a look at maybe some of the things that we are avoiding or are afraid to acknowledge. So I know I kind of jumped the gun here, but tell us, what is your understanding of counterfeit emotions, how that relates to the near and far emotions that we're going to talk about?
Well, the idea comes from it's a Buddhist theory, and I've learned about it from Brene Brown, and studied like Jack Kornfield's work. But the idea, when we have an ideal emotion, something we're seeking after, that's our ideal, right?
Hmm.
And the far enemy would be the complete opposite.
Yeah.
And far enemies we're usually very aware of, but the near enemy is what is the counterfeit that
Mm,
makes us believe that we're really quite there. So you brought up the idea of peace.
yeah.
The That's your ideal, right? The
Hmm.
far enemy would be like being upset, being like really, really discombobulated. Really, that to me is the far enemy of peace. But what is our near enemy? What state do we get ourselves in that makes us want to pretend that we're feeling peace? And that would be numbing out.
Hmm. Yeah, totally. Well, and I think of it, it kind of goes along with the same idea of some of the things that like self-care, right? When we tell ourselves like, oh yeah, I'm taking care of myself. And this has been a hot topic for me for a long time because people say self-care and they immediately associate bubble baths or and again, I love those different things, but it can be, if we're not careful, it can be a counterfeit to us actually taking care of ourselves. That's a way to distract away from us actually doing the work that we don't necessarily want to do, take responsibility, feel the emotions that are coming up. So tell me about that. How does that work with self-care then when we notice this?
Well, if your ideal is like, I'm trying to improve myself, that's what we mean by self care, right?
Yeah,
We're
right,
trying to acknowledge ourselves, we're trying to love ourselves, we're trying to make ourselves not to feel important, but to be as important as everybody else that we're taking care of, right?
right.
So that's your ideal. The far enemy would be completely losing yourself, not taking
Mm,
care of yourself. But the near enemy is a little bit self indulgent.
yes.
Self-indulgent.
Yes.
I'm gonna sit in a bubble bath, or I'm just gonna watch Netflix all day. That must be self-care, but it really isn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
I saw on JFF had a quote from Brianna West this week, and she talked about that real self-care is creating a life that we don't want to run away from, or that we don't want
Oh,
to escape from.
yes. So good. Yeah.
So can you see in that way, self-care is loving yourself enough to be moving forward?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's doing the hard work, right? Like so often, like what we're talking about the counterfeit is we're actually telling ourselves that we're doing the work when we're really not. And what you're talking about is living a life that brings everything in, like the 50-50 we talk about, or the full spectrum of our emotions that we're so afraid to feel. So I'm curious, how would you recommend someone going about identifying, recognizing where they might be living in a counterfeit or using counterfeit emotions versus kind of, really creating
Well,
the they would have?
one of the buzzwords terms that we hear a lot in coaching is I'm stuck. How do I get myself
Mm,
unstuck?
yep.
So I would say if there is an area of your life that you feel stuck in,
Hmm.
see if you can identify first the far enemy. So let's give the example, I want to feel connected to my spouse, but I feel really stuck, like I'm trying so hard.
Yeah.
So, okay, first identify your ideal. I want to feel connection. What is the far enemy? The far enemy would be disconnection, like just walking away, doing your own thing, totally disconnected. So, this is where we have to get really self aware and
Yeah.
look inward, look at ourselves in the mirror, face it. What is keeping me? What do I think is connection that isn't? So, it might look like something like enmeshment,
Mm,
trying to control our spouse, trying to I don't know, manipulate the situation. I
yeah.
think about the example, I just had this with a client the other day where she was so upset with her spouse because he had gotten upset with a teenager.
Mm,
He was going off, not how she would have handled it. Now she's talking to me because she wants, how do I create more connection with my husband, right?
yeah. Right.
Right? So she wants to feel connected. Far enemy would be getting angry with him, being so upset with him, yelling at him. I hate the way you handled that with a teenager. Not building connection, right?
Yeah.
What would be her near enemy? Her near enemy, she's trying to control her husband.
Yes.
She's
Yep.
trying to control him.
Yep.
So when we can identify that, like, wait a minute, this isn't connection. This isn't connection at all.
Yeah.
What am I doing to keep myself from feeling connected with my spouse right now? I'm judging him. I'm trying to control him. I'm correcting him, or even I have this belief, okay, if we did agree right now, then we would feel connected, but that's not what it's about. That's
Mm-mm,
not what it's
mm-mm. No, I love that so much. And I think those are so sneaky. Like those are,
about. So sneaky.
yeah,
Our near enemies are sneaky, and they just creep up on us and we don't even know they're happening.
yeah,
They
yeah.
fool us. They fool our brain.
Well, and that's why I'm sitting here like, okay, I get like it's so easy to see this, like what you're talking about, like coaching somebody else or seeing this. I can see this in my kids all of the time, right? We're so good at being able to see these different analogies in other people. But man, when I think about it for myself, I'm like, I think it's going to be harder, right, to recognize it in ourselves. And I love what you said about the stuck. I think we can start with being stuck, but is there any other like mindful practices or things that we can for ourselves to be able to see where we are stuck? Because I think sometimes we also tell ourselves that we're not stuck. Like we're still working on things. I don't know. I could see how this could really create a bigger,
Well, let's just go back to the example of if we're trying to do self-care and we're laying in a bubble
yeah.
bath watching Netflix.
Okay.
We may not know we're stuck, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I like to evaluate, is it helping me reach what I want to do?
Okay. Yeah. What?
Again, looking in the mirror.
Yeah.
Because even along the same lines, and I don't know if this answers your question correctly, but along the same lines as self-care, sometimes we set goals for ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have
Yeah.
things we want to do, and ideal, far enemy would just be letting it go. I'm not going to even do anything. But
Mm-hmm.
the near enemy is like staying busy with other things that
Yes.
keep us from achieving what we want.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
if you're asking what's a tool to evaluate what are my near enemies, it's slowing down enough, understanding what you want, slowing down enough, and being able to be aware and look at it
Mm,
with curiosity.
yeah. Well, and I think vulnerability, right? Like that's,
Ability.
oh, vulnerability, I think is such a scary one for so many people to recognize and address some of those both near and far enemies that I don't know are avoiding, helping us to avoid
That's right.
connections with ourselves and with other people.
That's right.
So
That's
let's talk some more examples here because I know we're saying some, but do you have any more like just easy ones? And it doesn't have to be a full example, but just like what would be a close enemy to like anger? Like if we see anger, because again, I think of these certain ones people can recognize very easily, right? I know when I'm feeling anger or I know when I'm feeling anxiety. We can really recognize those pretty easily. What might, in your interpretation, be a close enemy to anger or to anxiety?
Well, it's interesting that you bring up anger because last night I was reading in the Gottman's book, Fight Right, and they
Mm.
talk about anger as being a productive emotion.
Oh,
So it's
interesting. Okay.
interesting because for the concept of near and far enemies, we're looking for the ideal,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So if we take this and say, okay, maybe anger is our ideal, because according to the Gottmans, anger's okay.
Yeah.
We're not to be afraid of it. So if our ideal is to be angry, and that may come across inappropriate, but in a way that we want to feel strong and handle a problem, because the Gottmans say anger is just disappointment about what you're trying to achieve.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So if I'm really mad, let's go back to the example my husband got. I don't like how he handled it with my child, and
Okay.
I want to be angry about it.
Yes.
Okay. So are you following me? That's
Yes.
your ideal right there.
Yes.
You want to be productive. So the far enemy would be just to like avoid it. That's what the Gottmans talk about, just avoiding. I'm not going to deal with it. I'm going to push it away. The near enemy would be handling it with contempt or criticism or defense.
Resentment. Yes.
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 So
Okay.
if you can put those down
Yeah.
and handle your anger in an effective and productive way, then
Yeah.
it
I love what
can
you're
be a
saying.
healthy thing.
Yeah, because I think we do. We want to make sure we're saying enemy, and we don't want to make these emotions bad, right? That's not at all the goal with this tool of a
Oh,
new
emotions
response.
just give us information.
Right. Yeah. So I agree. Anger is we don't want to run it from it at all. I love what you said though, is you kind of using that example of like, what do we do with anger? That's actually what matters. If we are running from it or using it as resentment, you're right. That is not productive. That is not useful. But also on the other side of it, I think it's like the spectrum, right? You have to constantly be checking yourself on the spectrum or the pendulum as to the near and far, and maybe trying to find yourself, at least that's the picture that I'm getting right now, is more in the middle and trying to figure out what that is. Is that an individual decision then? Like how do we find that middle for us?
Well, do you mean middle, like in between near and far?
Yes. Yes. Like the productive, the useful, the like, because I mean, it's great to identify, right? Just to kind of
Well, I
see.
think it's interesting. I first saw the concept as like here and there, but the near enemy is right here. It's actually really close
Oh,
to the ideal.
okay. Oh, okay. I do like that.
Does
Okay.
that make sense? If we're
Yes.
looking at a continuum and we have our ideal on one side and the far enemy is complete opposite the other side,
Yeah.
near enemy isn't in the middle. The near enemy is sneaky. It's right up next to our ideal emotion.
Oh, that is so good. Okay. So it literally is just a practice of just checking in. I like the stuck. I keep coming back to the stuck. I think that is a great way for us to kind of check in and see, like, okay, where am I feeling stuck in my life? And just kind of the vulnerability part of it as well, right? Just kind of checking in and seeing, yeah. I don't know. I'm sitting here and like it's processing through my own brain as we're even talking about
Hey,
it.
Chantel, give me one of your ideals for
I
you.
feel like a circumstance or like emotion.
Emotion, like in your marriage, with your kids, like an ideal.
So I think ones that you've already addressed, but it would be interesting. I don't know where you're going to go with this, but connection for sure with my husband is going. Yeah, I would love connection with him.
Okay. So what's your far enemy? What's the totally opposite thing in your life that you know is not connection
Oh, it's full on disconnection.
or
It's
disconnection?
yeah, I am a very independent person,
Okay.
so I desire the connection, but then I will totally swing the opposite and just go disconnection all the way. Independence, yeah,
Mhm.
not
So independence, maybe even a toxic independence.
absolutely. Yes,
Okay.
I don't
So
need
what
him.
are total toxic independence and what are the sneaky things in your life that keep you from feeling connection with your husband? That maybe even look like connection.
Yeah. I think for some of it, it's kind of control based what you were saying, but I think over analyzing sometimes. Like I will look at something he's saying or doing or whatever, and I want to over analyze everything that he does or says. Um,
And does
constantly,
your brain want to sometimes lead you to believe that that is connection?
yeah, because I'm thinking about him, right? If I'm thinking
Yes.
about him, I'm
Yes.
connected to him. Yeah,
Yes. Yes.
absolutely. Yeah. And I think the other part of it is if I'm thinking about him, then I can work on that. Like it's a sneaky way of me telling myself I'm doing the work,
Mhm.
right? Of like noticing these things or over analyzing these things. This is where I think thought work can sometimes get us into trouble is like
For sure.
think about it enough, then I'm doing
Then we're
something
going to
about
be
it.
connected. We're
Right.
going to be connected.
Right. But it's all here that I'm doing it. So it still is you're right. It's a sneaky way of me still actually being super disconnected because I'm not doing anything different than, yeah, that's so true.
Well, and I see this example a lot with people I work with because especially when we get into the coaching world and we start learning about our own thoughts and our own feelings and that we can create this for
Yes.
ourselves,
Yes.
it is so easy to swing into toxic independence,
Yes. Absolutely.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And it happens with anyway, all sorts of coaches, but other people that just get into mind work,
Yep.
get into mindset and get into emotion work. And so the interesting thing is this toxic independence does not do anything for, I
Mm,
shouldn't say it doesn't do anything for connecting, but it doesn't build connection.
no. No.
And so we have to find a way to evaluate, okay, what's happening right here that's looks like connecting with my spouse, but actually isn't.
No. I
It's a
love that.
very healthy interdependent place to be.
Yeah.
Like, I'm healthy and I want him to be healthy and I want us to be healthy.
Well, it kind of goes back to that cliche of just like I because again, we've got to be careful with this that we're not swinging side to side with this, but it's like
Right.
we're not saying don't be independent, right? It's be selfish, take care, do the internal work. The second part is what we forget, so that you can be selfless. going out and connecting more with people. But I think so many times we tell ourselves that we're doing that, right? But it's only focusing on ourselves still. So I love what you're saying here. It's just like, yeah, be selfish, know what you're going through, but instead of just thinking nonstop or trying to solve all the problems by yourself, it's get out of your own way and actually connect with somebody else. And that's,
Right.
I think that you talk about the vulnerability. That's the vulnerability piece right there, because I think it requires us to do something that's not going to feel super comfortable, right? I'm super comfortable analyzing, being up in my brain, doing all of that, letting that go and actually trying to, that's vulnerability. And so this is easier for me to
This is
stay in.
easier. This
Yes,
is easier.
yes,
So
totally.
let's just say, Chantel, if you an ideal emotion is love, and
Yeah,
even we're talking about your spouse here, we really want to feel love.
yeah,
The far enemy of that would be hate.
right,
So
right.
what is the near enemy of love? It's attachment.
I was gonna say codependence or something. Yeah, totally.
It's
Yeah,
attachment.
yeah,
But being willing to look at that is super helpful.
yes,
It's
yes,
so helpful.
yes.
So a lot of times people ask me, well, Kathy, why is this even helpful? Why is this helpful? To understand, I mean, you probably have people ask you that, understand your emotions, but why
Hmm.
is it helpful for me to understand what are these near enemies of my ideal? And the thing is the more awareness we gain and the more we can discern what's happening for us,
Yeah.
because then we become connected with ourselves. And the more connected we are with ourselves, the more healthy we connect with others.
Yes, I love that. And that's the ultimate goal, I think, right? Is the connection. I think we all desire that. And yeah, I totally love that. So what would you say, is there more information out there? I know you referenced Brene Brown, right? Brene Brown has this amazing book, Atlas of the Heart. That's kind of where you started into this, but obviously that got you started and you kind of did a deeper dive into all of this. If there's people out there that are like, okay, I want to learn more about this, point them in a direction. What would you recommend for them to go and do?
Well, I would for sure have him read, it's the one of the last chapters in Atlas of the Heart.
Okay.
It is Brené's chapter on cultivating a meaningful connection in your life. And
Hmm.
this is the very first thing that she talks about, that near and far enemies. It's the
Okay.
basis of creating a cultivating connection. And you could look up John Cornfield. I would look at podcasts and Google it. But Brene Brown is probably the best place to start.
Okay. And then
This was,
I was gonna
oh,
say, just
sorry.
put it into to practice then, right? Like again,
Yes.
you got to be careful with this too of not needing to research and master it before we actually try and identify this for ourselves or use it in a way for ourselves.
Yeah,
So,
that's right. And that is a perfect example for me because I learned about this and I studied about it and I heard it in some of my trainings and I could not wrap my head around this
yeah.
because I was very much stuck in the like continuum. It's like this or the very other
Yeah.
side, like we were talking about.
Yep. Yep.
But once I started applying it for me,
Hmm.
what are my ideals? What are my far enemies? Totally opposite. And what are the sneaky things that make me think I'm getting my ideal? That's when I started to understand it more. So,
I love that. And I think as you're saying that, I'm like, this would be a good journal or a thought download prompt, an opportunity for you. Because I think it is good for us to use our brain for this, but just sit down and like, okay, where am I, like you said, where am I stuck? Where am I holding myself back? And letting yourself identify kind of those questions you were asking me, right? Okay, it's so easy. We can identify the far, but what might the sneaky little ones near to us look like and feel? And as soon as you say it, it's sometimes you don't even need to do anything else with it. It's just that awareness of like, oh, that's codependence or
right.
attachment or whatever. I'm like, oh, that totally makes sense. That might be enough. But spending
And
time,
I would for sure ask yourself, what is the sneaky one that looks like my ideal?
yes,
What
yes,
are the ones that my brain wants to believe
yes,
is love or is connection or is self care?
yes. Oh, yes, for sure. I can even see this how this relates to, oh man, I think every aspect of our lives, but like spirituality, our faith, our testimony. I mean, like, I think so many times we kind of get complacent in those areas too. And that's a sneaky way of us not doing the work a little bit too. So I
Well, let's just give a quick example about if we are on a testimony of Jesus Christ.
yeah,
That's our ideal.
yeah,
The far enemy is I don't believe anymore and I'm leaving the church.
yep,
The near enemy might look like me judging other people, how they're living the gospel,
Yes.
how they're building their testimony. Like it looks like
Yes.
I am a disciple of Jesus Christ, but that is keeping me from the ideal.
Yes. No, I totally agree with that. Because I think again, if I'm using this for myself, that's my way of trying to make sure that I'm okay. Like I'm using what I'm judging in other people to say like, okay, do I have a testimony instead of just owning it? And that's vulnerability. Like be owning it myself. That's harder to do. It's so much easier for us to judge and compare everybody else. But you're right. Like that's so sneaky because we think we're doing right by comparing or noticing. So, so true.
That's
Man,
right.
this is so fun. I so appreciate this conversation and you being willing just to kind of take a little sneak peek into Kathy's brain about this information. I think it could really help people, again, like you said, see where they're stuck and maybe give them just a little oomph of to like, okay, now I understand and now I can try something different. So
Yeah.
I appreciate you.
Well,
Thank
and
you.
I would say, Chantel, first of all, thank you for having me on the
Yes,
podcast.
of course.
But there is a difference of just gaining awareness and then actually doing the
Yes,
work, like really working to move ourselves forward.
yes,
And this concept of near and far enemies is doing the work.
yeah. Yeah, it really is. Even though I was just talking to you, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm good. I'm totally good. And then I'm like, oh, there's still some more things. Because I think that's the sneaky way too, of just telling myself, I'm good with that. I'm totally fine. And you identifying this, I'm like, oh, there's still some more that I can work on, which is great. We're never done. We're
Right.
never
We're
mastered.
all here for it,
So
aren't
yeah, I love that. Well, thank you, Kathy, for being here on the podcast. Is there a way people can find and reach you if they want to give you their thoughts or ask you more questions about this?
for sure. They can find me on Instagram at Kathy Moffat
Okay. Well,
Coaching
thank
or,
coaching. Look up
website,
Kathy
all the
Moffat.
normal ways. Sorry.
I will find it. I will link it below if people want to just jump on there. But I encourage you guys to reach out. She's an amazing coach. If you guys are struggling with relationships, she'd be a phenomenal resource for you guys. But thank you for coming on
Thanks.
and just sharing this information with us.